in order to build a border wall. It's a move that will almost certainly set up a huge legal and legislative uproar. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live tonight on the North Lawn with what we know at this hour. It's been changing throughout the day. Good evening, John.
As it always seems to in these parts. Bret, good evening to you. It has long been expected that President Trump could declare a national emergency in order to build his border wall. But when the news finally dropped this afternoon, it shook the halls of Congress. As the White House was taking a microscope to the spending bill this afternoon, a stunning announcement from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I've just had an opportunity to speak with President Trump, and he, I would say to all my colleagues, has indicated he's prepared to sign the bill. He will also be issuing a national emergency declaration at the same time.
The announcement made good on a threat the president had said he'd prefer not to use, but was left with little choice after receiving the text of a bill that fell well short of what he wanted. In a statement, the press secretary saying he was taking the emergency action to ensure we stop the national security and humanitarian crisis at the border. The president is once again delivering on his promise to build a wall, protect the border, and secure our great country. In a joint statement, the Speaker of the House and Senator Chuck Schumer said declaring a national emergency would be a lawless act, a gross abuse of the power of the presidency.
The precedent that the president is setting here is something that should be met with great unease and dismay by the Republicans. And of course, we will respond accordingly when we review our options. First, we have to see what the president actually says.
The way it all played out was exactly what South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham suggested more than a month ago.
There's some things in there that are good for border security, and let him march toward filling in the gaps by executive action.
The spending bill gives the president $1.37 billion for pedestrian fencing in the Rio Grande Valley sector. But there are also restrictions that the president is bristling at. The bill stipulates that border wall cannot be built in several areas, including the National Butterfly Center west of McAllen. It also gives local authorities in 5 Texas border towns veto power over the wall. And it puts significant handcuffs on the president's discretion to make changes in spending. There are 354 instances in the bill where the phrases "none of the funds," "none of these funds," and "none of the amounts" are used to place restrictions on how the money can be used or moved around. Declaring an emergency may allow President Trump to move some money around from other departments to add to wall construction. It will almost certainly land him in the courts, but he will be able to tell his base he did all he could to make good on his central campaign promise. The House Speaker said it also sends a message to the Democratic base.
If the president can declare an emergency on something that he has created as an emergency, an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people.
White House officials say that their attorneys have been looking at the ins and outs of an emergency declaration for months, and while they do expect that this will end up in the courts and most likely in the jurisdiction of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the press secretary Sarah Sanders said today that the White House is very prepared to meet a legal challenge. Bret?
John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. Let's bring in our panel a little early tonight with the breaking news. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and president. Byron, your thoughts?
Well, on the bill itself, the president really has to sign it. He gave in during the last government shutdown because the political pressure, the pain got too great. Now, in this case, he would have a bill on his desk. The only thing between keeping the government open and shutting it down would be his signature. There's no way he wasn't going to do it. Now, on the issue of a national emergency, I think what we're going to see here is Democrats are, of course, going to claim that there's simply no emergency. It just doesn't exist. The court challenges will be filed within seconds after the president does this. The president's case is going to be, look, there are about 30 current national emergencies declared by presidents. Most of them have to do with sanctioning individuals in countries that are very troubled, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Burundi, Yemen. But the president will say, look, last year about 400,000 people were apprehended trying to cross illegally into the United States between the ports of entry. And who's to say that's not a national emergency? And that's what he'll argue.
There actually have been 58 since 1976. If you look at this graphic, there are 30 that are still active. These are all the national emergencies that have been declared. President Obama had 12 of them, including the bird flu emergency and others. Take a listen to lawmakers on national emergencies.
I think declaring a national emergency, where there is no national emergency, is not good for the president to do.
It's not my preferred choice, but I don't think the world's going to spin off its axis.
Declaring a national emergency would be a lawless act.
I think he has all the legal authority in the world to do this.
I think all of us will come to regret this. It is not the right way for the president to try and end-run Congress.
Lindsey Graham, the most vocal, Susan, saying, I stand firmly behind President Trump's decision. He obviously hasn't done it yet. Word is that Senator McConnell is trying to still try to prevent him from doing it.
Well, although Senator McConnell said on the floor of the Senate he would support the president if he declared a national emergency. You know, it's true that there are other national emergencies. That's not so rare. This is a somewhat different utilization of that presidential power than most of the others in history. And, you know, interestingly, President George W. Bush once threatened to declare a national emergency, and it was blocked in effect when George Miller from California used a kind of an obscure parliamentary provision that meant that you could oppose it, and if you got a majority of the Congress to vote against the declaration of national emergency, it was repealed. It was pushed back, and that is another course that Democrats could pursue. Certainly that would pass in the House. It is possible a proposal like that might pass in the Senate because there are several Republicans who have expressed concern.
Tom, our latest Fox poll, we asked the question about bypassing Congress, declaring emergency to build the wall. It is upside down, this 56-38. But if you look at others like number one, the budget deal that includes money for barrier security and humanitarian aid. There's support for that. It's how you ask the question, obviously, where the support comes down.
Yeah, I mean, this is a risky move on Trump's part in the sense that it does certainly shore up his base, and it keeps the issue top of mind. And I think the contrast that Trump likes is the idea that it's a matter of opinion. He says this is a national emergency, and Democrats are rushing to the barricades to say this is a complete fiction, it's an invention. That's a contrast that he wants. The downside is it puts the focus back on a split in the Republican caucus, and the media will certainly cover all of the Republicans that are going to come out and say this isn't the proper way to go. So, you know, after Trump got a pretty significant bump in his job approval rating after the State of the Union speech, in part because of the bipartisan message, I think he's back to brawling. And so we'll see how this works out for him, but it's definitely a risky move on his part.
You know, I talked to a couple of people who said that part of it was the way the bill was written, that it had all these handcuffs in it. The funds cannot be used for X, Y, and Z, and that they were trying to move different pots of money around to make at least some part of the wall work through moving this money, and it was pretty handcuffed by 354 phrases.
Yeah, well, John mentioned that, and there are several geographical restrictions. There are parks that you can't put up any barrier parks right on the border. But, you know, from a policy standpoint, this may not be a popular view. Trump actually did make some progress here. The administration has already been replacing about 125 miles of dilapidated, inadequate fence with new, strong barrier. This bill allows them to do 55 miles of currently unfenced area with a new strong barrier, and that really arguably is an improvement in border security. Now, it's not nearly what the president wants. It's more like the glass quarter full, but on the other hand, he actually made some progress from a time not too long ago where the Speaker of the House was declaring any such barrier immoral.
And not too long ago, Mr. Trump tweeted about President Obama. Republicans must not allow President Obama to subvert the Constitution of the U.S. for his own benefit and because he is unable to negotiate with Congress. As you can imagine, Democrats are pouring out in their response. Tulsi Gabbard, running for president. Every time a president declares a national emergency in order to get his way on a particular issue, the closer we are to a dictatorship. Who needs Congress or the people if the president can make the decision on issues by himself? Very dangerous precedent. That's a little overheated, don't you think, Susan?
That may be a little hot, but here's what Nancy Pelosi said this afternoon. She said, you know what, Republicans are opening a door that a Democratic president will be able to walk through in the future. So when a Democratic president looks at the state of the nation, they might say climate change is a national emergency. Congress won't act. I will. Or gun violence in schools. That's a national emergency. Congress won't act. I will. Now, that is President Trump may not care about that. He won't be president anymore. But that is a long-term risk for the Republican Party.
You agree with that?
Yeah, well, sure, it's going to set a precedent, but a Democratic president has already walked through it. Obama used his pen and his phone for an executive order that he himself said was not constitutional and did it anyway. And so this is sort of a logical progression. I do think it'll set a precedent, and certainly Democrats will exploit it when they can, but we're already down that road.
And does the base say the hat tip to national emergency solves the pushback on the bill?
Well, Trump's base has thought this was a national emergency for quite a while, before the 2016 election. So they're not going to take any convincing. But I think the president has to make the case to a larger public that with all of these crossings and with U.S. law basically preventing the United States from immediately returning border crossers to Mexico, it creates a national security issue plus a humanitarian crisis on the border where there are lots of people growing by 30,000 a month that the United States either has to take care of or release into the United States.
We'll have a House vote tonight, and then we assume the president will make his decision and announcement sometime before opening of business Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. Panel, thank you. We'll see you later in the show. Meantime, the U.S. wants its European partners to leave the Iran nuclear deal. That is one major focus of a summit in Poland on Middle East issues. We'll have an extensive interview with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo from Warsaw in just a few minutes. But first, the latest on the meeting from State Department correspondent Rich Edson.
European governments should join the United States, leave the Iran nuclear agreement, and stop enabling Iranian business. That's Vice President Mike Pence's message to Britain, France, and Germany.
Sadly, some of our leading European partners have not been nearly as cooperative. In fact, they've led the effort to create mechanisms to break up our sanctions.
The Vice President joined Secretary of State summit in Warsaw to promote a future of peace and security in the Middle East. For the Trump administration, that largely means confronting Iran.
There was not a defender of Iran in the room. No country spoke out and denied any of the basic facts that we all had laid out about Iran.
Britain, France, and Germany are still complying with the Iran nuclear deal because they say Iran is still complying. They have created a process to help Iran conduct business despite U.S. sanctions. In response to the vice president's criticism, a British Foreign Office spokesperson says, quote, the UK is not and has never been naive about Iran and its nuclear intentions. The best way to address these wider concerns is while the nuclear deal remains in place. Pence says compliance is not the issue. The deal itself is the issue. While the U.S. and allies disagree on the nuclear agreement, the European governments have criticized and worked to address Iran's ballistic missile program and its interference across the Middle East. Brett?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Rich, thanks. We'll have my interview with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a little later in this program. Up next, a former top FBI official says he was in on the talk of a plan that could have removed President Trump from office. We'll bring that to you. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WDRB in Louisville as a federal utility board moves to close a coal-fired power plant in Kentucky over the objections of President Trump and some state GOP leaders. The Tennessee Valley Authority voted to retire the remaining coal-fired unit at its Paradise Fossil plant by December of next year. The head of the board says the decision is about finances. Fox 32 in Chicago with a legal challenge to the planned construction of former President Obama's $500 million presidential museum and library. A judge heard arguments today on a city motion to dismiss the lawsuit An advocacy group says the project violates laws barring development in lakeside parks. And this is a live look at a foggy Denver from Fox 31. The big story there tonight, an end to the teacher strike. Educators will get pay raises of about 11% with built-in cost of living increases and more opportunities for future salary hikes. The deal still must be ratified by the full union membership. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. New Attorney General. Barr left the White House a short time ago after his scheduled this morning. The vote 54 to 45. Barr was Attorney General from 1991 to 1993. He succeeds Jeff Sessions, who was pushed out by President Trump last year over Sessions recusing himself from the Russia investigation. A federal judge has found former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort intentionally lied to investigators and a federal grand jury in the Russia probe. Judge Amy Berman Jackson says Manafort is in breach of his plea agreement. Manafort was accused of lying about several matters, including his discussions with a longtime associate the FBI says has ties to Russian intelligence. Manafort remains jailed, awaiting sentencing. The head of the Senate Judiciary Committee wants to hear from former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe in person. This weekend, McCabe will tell television viewers how the special counsel investigation into alleged Russian collusion began and his efforts to actually try to remove President Trump from office. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has specifics tonight.
You're having a conversation about whether or not you're going to invoke the 25th Amendment.
The Republican Senate Judiciary Committee chairman did not rule out a subpoena to compel testimony from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and former Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe about discussions to remove President Trump.
I would imagine if the shoe were on the other foot, my Democratic colleagues would want to know about that conversation if it involved a Democrat.
Graham was responding to McCabe's upcoming 60 Minutes interview. According to CBS, McCabe confirmed longstanding media reports, including by Fox, that he believed Rosenstein was serious about wearing a wire to record the president.
I was speaking to the man who had just run for the presidency and won the election for the presidency, and who might have done so with the aid of the government of Russia.
May 17 is a pivotal month. Rosenstein was just 2 weeks into the job when FBI Director James Comey was fired by the president. In response, an obstruction of justice investigation was opened, in addition to the FBI's ongoing Russia collusion probe.
I wanted to make sure that our case was on solid ground.
In a statement, the Justice Department seemed to stop short of denying Rosenstein talked about removing the president. Quote, the Deputy Attorney General never authorized any recording that Mr. McCabe references. Based on his personal dealings with the president, there is no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment. In a tweet, President Trump hit back, characterizing McCabe as, quote, disgraced and a puppet for leaking James Comey.
With the special counsel appointment, McCabe's role was significantly reduced, and last spring he was fired for violating the FBI's code of ethics for lying. McCabe's case is now with the U.S. Attorney here in Washington for possible criminal prosecution. Brett.
Catherine, thank you. Up next, my interview with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Plus, Democrats meet here in Washington to plot a way forward entering the presidential campaign season. First, beyond our borders tonight, Egyptian lawmakers have voted to extend term limits for President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi until 2034. It's part of a package of constitutional amendments, also set further to enshrine the military role in politics. It will now face a national referendum. President Trump's son-in-law and senior Middle East advisor, Jared Kushner, says the Trump administration will unveil its much-awaited peace plan for the Middle East after Israeli elections on April 9th. Palestinians have preemptively rejected the so-called deal of the century, accusing the U.S. of being unfairly biased toward Israel. A news website says it has established the identity of an alleged Russian military officer, intelligence officer, who was in Britain when a Russian former double agent and his daughter were poisoned. Bellingcat says the man was also in Bulgaria in 2015 when a businessman there was poisoned. The British government has named 2 alleged Russian agents as suspects. Moscow denies involvement. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back.
Minimums. If someone walks in shooting, somebody walks in with a weapon threatening kids, We're not going to fool around. We're not going to pause. We're not going to ask them questions. We're going to shoot them. Eliminate the threat. You know, if they die in the process, that's unfortunate, but better them than one of our students, quite frankly.
We're not going to talk with them. We're not going to negotiate. We are going to put them down as quickly as possible. Well, that is a plan. Compare that to the wishy-wash of the Broward sheriff, who was so anxious to blame the NRA that he forgot to look in the mirror at himself. Manatee is a charter school operating under their own authority, so they can decide who to hire. They went with armed combat vets. One guard is a 15-year Army vet who served 3 tours. So the school's protected by the best defenders on earth, and those vets have jobs that contribute to the safety of society. After Parkland, all Florida schools were mandated to have armed security. It's a year to the day since that massacre. Here's a fact. The duration of a mass shooting is shortened by the arrival of a second gun. Manatee shrunk that duration to 0. The school has 2,100 students. I'm sure some parents there are spooked by having armed guards with rifles, but others might be resting easier. And it's often hard to ponder solutions with the media placing the issue within a prison of 2 ideas. If you aren't for gun control, you want kids to die. This, as their wall-to-wall coverage, creates a spectacle for copycats who want to leave a mark on the world. It is sobering that in this peaceful age, we need soldiers at schools. But if it works, then I say give it a try. So, Dana, shooters overwhelmingly focus on locations where there are no perceived protections. I think the theater shooter actually drove by his intended target.
In Aurora, Colorado.
Yeah, because there was a cop car there. So he's got it right.
I think so. And it was kind of hard to believe that it has been a year since Parkland. The students there have had a tremendous impact on getting their messages out. And Congress is going to Congress has moved slowly. And I think that these school districts cannot wait for Washington to try to help solve their problems. You have to figure out a way to figure it out for their district because the grief for these parents has come in waves. And it no doubt buckles them, right? Buckles their knees. They are dealing with things that we we move on and we talk about other things. This constantly in the forefront of their mind. So if a superintendent of schools or a principal can give comfort to parents that they don't have to worry that there's going to be anything wishy-washy.
Yeah.
There is a plan. I would rather have that done at the local level than at the national level. I think it's a lot more effective.
Yeah. Jesse, the thing is, when he does this, it gets the word out. He's basically, if you're going to plan on that school, you're not going to go to that school.
I liked how unapologetic he was. Yeah, we'll put you down. Everything we value in this country we protect with guns, whether it's banks, whether it's companies, whether it's our borders, celebrities, everything we protect, there's an armed guard outside, but not children. It doesn't make sense. The point is, you're not handing over a loaded gun to some second grade teacher who's 73 years old and you say, hey, Rambo, hold the line. These are well-trained professionals that go through training and know what they're doing and know how to handle firearms. The other thing is you're not militarizing schools. You have people armed with weapons outside the Super Bowl. You're not militarizing the Super Bowl.
Good point.
Eliminating the NRA isn't going to stop school shootings. Banning an AR-15 isn't going to stop school shootings. You can spend all the money in the world. You're not going to stop it. The only thing you're going to do is you have to neutralize it before they shoot more people. And the only way to do it is have an armed guy with proximity to the shooter.
Well, I think it's a great match, returning vets. And a job like this, it's 2,100 students. That's more than employees at a mall that has armed security. So it makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you?
I just worry about the idea that you're putting guns next to kids. And I think who gets picked on is kids and kids that act up. But today I just wanted to say, I just feel for parents who've lost a child. I just think it's important that we say, you know what, you can't imagine the pain in a heart that comes to that. There was a letter written by Lori Alsdorf to her daughter Alicia, who was killed. And I was reading, I was just like, it's Valentine's Day, and that's her memory, is that her daughter went to school today and was killed. So for me, when I see people say, like Donald Trump put out a statement today and initially said, hey, we've got to do something about gun violence. Then he had to change it to school violence. It's like you have to just play politics in order to ignore the reality. We've got too many guns in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I love the reps from this school. They're totally unapologetic. They're proactive. And one of the things they said to summarize was, we're not looking for a fair fight. We're looking for a huge advantage. And that's the truth. I love that. That is absolutely true. And I think people who are a little unsure about things like arming teachers, for example, where they get a little concerned about that, should find comfort in combat vets. These are the people who have the proper training with firearms and who have the proper training for situations like this. They're not going to flee the scene. They're not going to make the kinds of mistakes in those spontaneous moments that somebody else who hasn't been there might do. So this, I think, is a middle ground where people should feel comfortable.
All right. Well, terror in the skies. Yes, terror. After Delta flight nosedives twice at 30,000 feet. See it next.
Nosediving twice at 34,000 feet, creating panic and a huge mess in the cabin. Reportedly injured, with 3 sent to the hospital. Thankfully, the plane made an emergency landing in Nevada. Here's the passenger who shot the video.
The plane was dropping, and it was dropping nose first. We were out of our chairs. We were flailing in the air. I actually thought that the plane might break up.
Oh. All right, so these are the types of stories that leave me, Greg, on the edge of my seat. I feel like everyone has a little bit of plane phobia, and when you hear, right, and when you,
all right. First of all,
go ahead.
that
Just
tape,
interrupt me and carry on.
That tape was not what I expected. I was expecting nosedives, and I didn't get nosedives. Okay.
Double nosedive.
Okay, so why is this news? I've got some thoughts on this. Because it's rare. In traffic accidents, there's like 30,000 people die a year. We don't report them because they're common. But anytime something happens in a plane, we report it because it's so damn safe. This is going to happen to the automobile industry once we have self-driving cars. In 30 years, right? If somebody dies in a self-driving car, it'll be on the front pages. Until then, we're going to have 30,000 people dying. Now, the other thing that I wrote notes on. Why is it that our computers keep getting faster? There's like Moore's Law, it doubles like every 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But our planes don't get any faster. In fact, the airline industry gets worse. It's the only industry, in my mind, that's going backwards and not forwards. Why can't we have, we got rid of the Concorde.
People say the news industry is going backwards.
That's good for us, because
we're going forward.
Because I can rise to the top if it's going backwards.
I think it also gets coverage like that because when you get on an airplane, you are suspended in midair, which makes people more. I mean, when you get into a car, you're on the road. You don't automatically get in your head thinking the worst that could happen. But on an airplane, I sure do. I don't know about you.
Well, because you're so vulnerable. You're off the ground. You're not in control unless you're the pilot, and even the pilot, when you hit turbulence, is not in control. So they tell you to wear your seatbelt and all. But I got to tell you that one of the scariest things of my life, I was doing a campaign, I think it was a Jesse Jackson campaign, and he didn't have much money. So
that's scary enough.
Older plane, propellers, and we're over Dallas or someplace, middle of the night. Man, the turbulence hits. And you should see, like, they get these big techs, and they're all in the back hanging out. They start hitting the ceiling, screaming, crying. The stewardesses ran to the front. They were afraid themselves. It was like time to go home.
Did you panic?
Did I'm like, you know what? My day is coming. It's written.
Yeah. Yeah.
That happens a lot on the show.
I'm telling you.
The one plus to the story, actually, that was surprising was that everyone was saying that Delta did a great job. There's been so many bad news reports of airline stories, and they're saying Delta handled it great, all the tweets, all the comments. So I don't know.
That's why I'm a Sky Miles member.
Yeah. No, but is that something? Like if this happens to you, is there something?
Yeah, United would have booted it. They wouldn't have just known what they were doing. When I was on Air Force One, we didn't have turbulence. I think they have mechanisms that can kind of alleviate that.
Way to work that into the story.
There's turbulence on Air Force One.
I mean, I don't know if was that bad of a nosedive. I saw the drink cart went over like that.
No, it was pretty
maybe
bad. Three people went to the hospital.
Really?
To the hospital. She just said that.
For physical problems or mental anguish?
And if you look at the aisles, everything is kind of turned upside down.
Aisles were messy. The aisles are messy usually when I fly. So no, I'm kidding. I don't want to downplay it. It looked serious. It happened to me one time, and I texted my mom and I said I love you. I thought I was going to die.
Yeah. And then she just wrote back.
She wrote, you misspelled love.
I'm just wondering if this were to happen, Dana, if there's anything that, if I were on that plane, if there's anything that people who were operating or could do to make me feel better. I feel like in that moment, you're just
well,
terrified
but you know,
no
my
matter
husband
what.
always tells me, because he's a very confident flyer. He's traveled for millions of miles all around the world for business. He says the guys at the front end of the plane want to get home just as badly as you do. So there's that. I also think that when the airline calls for a flight delay,
be happy.
Yeah, just trust them. Like,
Yes.
they don't make extra money.
People want to get there on time and die.
Just accept it. And you know, it is true. Wear your seatbelt when you're sitting in your seat, and don't get up and hang out in the area.
You'd be the first person to get mad at a delay in the airport.
No. I do not like, if there's any kind of a hint that there might be inclement weather, I'm at the bar.
You're so drunk, you don't remember
and
a
I'm
delay.
like, I don't care, because no,
But by the way,
I'm always happy about that.
By the way, airlines are safer now than ever.
Yes, they are. They are.
True. That's why this is news.
Yep. Well, don't go anywhere,
good job.
because a Valentine's Day treat, that's coming up for you next.
I got no rules, I count 'em. Average of $339 on their significant other.
What?
While women get a little
generous.
toy, too.
I'm surprised by this. Yeah, Peter and I don't do a lot on Valentine's.
Win for gay dudes, right?
What do you mean by that?
It's win-win.
They get the most stuff?
They get the most stuff. Okay, Valentine's Day is proof that the sexes are intertwined and complementary. For example, men care about it more because they want to please their partner, right? So the thing is, it's not a competition, it's that they work together, the yin and the yang. There's this research out that says married men live longer than single men or divorced men, and that's because women bring to the marriage low risk behaviors that reduce the high risk behaviors of men.
What are you doing for Valentine's Day?
Nothing, because
why?
Elena, Russian. They don't have Valentine's Day. She doesn't even know it exists.
Oh, that's
they have International Women's Day. And I don't even know what it is. But if I miss that, I am screwed.
Wait, that's on a different day?
It's on a different day. I think it's a communist thing that started in, I don't know.
And
the
you give her
Bolsheviks,
presents.
I think the Bolsheviks started it, and they expect really expensive stuff.
More so than Valentine's?
It's like a bigger deal. Because it's moms. It's international.
All the women in your life.
The risks of marrying a Russian.
Anything that has international in front of it, communistic.
Okay. Jedediah, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not a Valentine's Day kind of gal, but my wedding anniversary is on the 17th, so we'll probably just celebrate that. But
no, you can't smush. You can't smush.
I've never done Valentine's Day. It's it's so commercial, and I don't really
Wait,
like.
you don't do it, or your man doesn't?
I'm not into it. I mean, he's gonna make me a good dinner tonight, and that's the weight of my heart is through my stomach. So I always say that.
Is he gonna wear an apron?
Men like it. The reason I think men like it, yes, of course, is because I think they like to be chivalrous, and sometimes they don't know how to do it. But Valentine's Day kind of
feels awkward.
Yeah,
I see.
All right, Juan, real quick, what are you doing tonight?
Well, the problem is I'm in New York and my wife's in D.C. And
So,
That's a problem?